My father looked straight through me at his retirement party like I was some woman who had wandered in off the street, and when I stepped forward with the gift I had spent 3 weeks planning, he said, in a voice calm enough to freeze the whole room, "Don't act like my daughter tonight." The smiles around me collapsed so fast it felt like the air had been sucked out of the banquet hall. My husband, the man who had held my hand in the parking lot 10 minutes earlier and promised me we would get through this family night together, did not come to my side. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and realized the ones who should have protected you were the ones most ready to let you break, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment only if this story truly resonates with you. And tell me the city or country you're watching from, and your local time right now. My name is Claire Bennett, I'm 30 years old. And this was the night my family stopped pretending they loved me. To understand how I ended up standing under the warm gold lights of a hotel ballroom feeling like the loneliest person in America, I have to take you back to where the cracks first began. My father, Richard Bennett, had spent 37 years working for the same utility company outside Columbus, Ohio, and his retirement party was being treated like a major family event, the kind where everyone dressed nicely, hugged for pictures, and acted as if history could be polished clean with a decent meal and a rented microphone. My stepmother, Diane, had texted me the week before with a message so sugary it almost made me suspicious. She said my father wanted all his girls there, which was funny, because he had not called me one of his girls in years. Still, I said yes. I always said yes when there was even the smallest chance that things might go back to how they were before my parents divorced, before Diane arrived, before every holiday started to feel like a performance where I had to guess whether I was family or just tolerated. I bought him a silver watch engraved with a simple line on the back. "Proud of you, Dad. Love, Claire." It was not cheap. My husband, Ethan, told me I was doing too much, but not in a cruel way, more in that tired, distracted tone he had started using with me over the past few months, like my feelings had become one more household expense we could not afford. Even then, I told myself he was stressed from work. I told myself my father was getting older, softer, more reflective. I told myself this party could be a reset. That afternoon I spent an hour curling my hair, then brushed most of it out because I wanted to look polished but not like I was trying too hard. I wore a navy blue dress that hit just below the knee, and nude heels I regretted by the time we crossed the hotel lobby. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the center console, close enough that I noticed it, far enough that he never actually reached for mine. "Just keep things easy tonight," he said as we pulled in. "No heavy conversations." I turned and looked at him. Since when am I the one who makes things heavy? He gave me that small half-smile people use when they want credit for patience without offering comfort. "I'm just saying your dad's got a lot going on." That should have been the moment I paid attention. Not because of what he said, but because of how rehearsed it sounded, like a line he had already practiced in his head. When we walked into the ballroom, I saw ivory tablecloths, framed photo boards from my father's career, little bowls of mint candies, and a banner that read "Happy Retirement, Richard" in dark blue letters. There were maybe 80 people there, coworkers, cousins, neighbors, church friends, and the first thing I noticed was not the decorations. It was the way conversations thinned when I entered, just for a second, just enough to make me feel it. Diane kissed the air near my cheek and said, "You made it." Like my arrival had been uncertain. My younger half-sister Megan gave me a quick, tight hug without meeting my eyes. My father was across the room laughing with 2 men in gray suits, and when he finally turned and saw me, his face did not brighten. It closed. It closed so quietly that if I had not spent half my life studying my father's moods, I might have missed it. He handed off his drink to one of the men beside him, straightened the cuff of his white shirt, and started toward me with the kind of expression people wear before a difficult conversation in an office, not a family reunion. I felt Ethan shift beside me, just enough to let me know he was alert now, and that unsettled me more than if he had looked confused. My father stopped a few feet away, not close enough to hug me, not close enough to even touch the gift box in my hands. "You are late," he said. I glanced at the large brass clock over the bar. We were 7 minutes past 6. "Traffic was bad on I-71, I said, forcing a small smile. "But I made it." He looked at the box, then back at my face as if both things disappointed him. "You should have come earlier if you wanted a private word." There was something inside that sentence that made my stomach tighten. I had not asked for a private word. Before I could answer, Diane appeared at his elbow in a satin green dress, her lipstick perfect, her eyes too bright. "Richard, the photographer is ready for family pictures," she said, and then turned to me with that same polished emptiness. "We are doing immediate family first." I do not know if it was those exact words or the way she said them, but I felt heat rise up my neck. "I am immediate family," I said, before I could stop myself. Diane gave the tiniest shrug, the kind that can be denied later. "Of course. I just meant the order." My father still had not taken the gift. Ethan, standing on my right, said nothing. That silence was becoming its own kind of language. We moved toward the photo area near the stage where a navy backdrop had been set up with the company logo in one corner. Megan was already there, smoothing her hair, smiling too quickly. Her husband stood with one hand at her waist, and for a second I had the strange, childish thought that everyone else in the room had been given a script except me. The photographer, a cheerful woman with reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck, started arranging people by height and relation. "Wife next to retiree, daughters on the sides," she said. She lifted her hand toward Megan first. Diane stepped neatly into place. Then there was a pause just a beat too long before anyone looked at me. My father did not gesture me in. He just stood there with his jaw set, staring past the camera lights. "Claire, just stand wherever," Diane said lightly, as if she were being generous. "Wherever. Not beside him. Not as his daughter. Just somewhere at the edges where the picture could still be called complete." I moved into frame because 80 people were watching and because humiliation in public has a way of making you act normal long past the moment you should walk away. The photographer snapped a few shots. "Great, now maybe one with just the kids," she said. Again there was that pause. Megan looked at Diane. Diane looked at my father. My father exhaled through his nose and finally spoke, not loudly but clearly enough. "Just Megan." The photographer blinked. "Oh, okay." I laughed then, one short breath of disbelief, because the alternative was crying under fluorescent lights in front of coworkers holding crab cakes and champagne flutes. "What is this?" I asked, looking directly at him. "What are you doing?" He did not answer right away. He only adjusted his jacket and looked toward the crowd gathering near the stage for speeches, like he was measuring whether this was the moment. Ethan leaned closer to me and murmured, "Claire, not here." My whole body went cold. Not because he wanted to keep the peace, but because he said it with the awful calm of someone who already knew what peace was going to cost me. I turned to him so fast my heel slipped slightly on the polished floor. "What does that mean?" I whispered. He would not look at me. Out on the ballroom floor, someone tapped a spoon against a glass to get attention, and the room began to settle. My father reached for the microphone waiting on the stand near the podium, and in that instant, before he said a single word, before the crowd went fully quiet, I knew with a certainty so sharp it almost felt physical that whatever was about to happen had been building long before I walked through those hotel doors. My father took the microphone with the same composed expression he used at church fundraisers, company dinners, and every holiday table where appearances mattered more to him than truth. The room quieted in that polite, expectant way people do when they think they are about to hear a warm speech about gratitude, legacy, and the next chapter of a respectable man's life. He thanked the company first, of course. 37 years. Loyal service. Good friends. Long winters, storm calls, missed weekends, hard work that put food on the table. People nodded and smiled. A few of his old co-workers lifted their glasses. If you had walked in at that moment, you would have thought you were watching a man being honored. You would never have guessed he was about to make sure his own daughter would never feel safe in his presence again. I stood near the edge of the photo backdrop with the gift still in my hand, the silver paper beginning to bend under my fingers. Ethan was beside me but not with me. That difference had become impossible to ignore. He kept his eyes on my father, not out of concern for me, but with the tense focus of someone waiting for a difficult scene he already knew by heart. My father cleared his throat, smiled faintly at the crowd, and said retirement had a way of making a man think about truth, responsibility, and what should have been said years ago. I remember every word after that with awful precision, maybe because shock has a strange way of preserving sound. He said there were things in life a man tolerated when he was young, tired, and trying to hold a family together. He said there were lies that shaped an entire household. Then he said he was done carrying a burden that had never belonged to him. First I thought he meant my mother. Or Diane. Or money. I did not understand until he turned his head and looked directly at me. The whole room followed his gaze. Some people here know me as Claire's father, he said, calm as ever. But the truth is, Claire is not my daughter. I did not move. I do not think I even breathed. It was as if my body refused to understand language that cruel when it came from the voice that had once taught me how to ride a bike, how to drive in the rain, how to check the oil in my first car. Around the room, faces changed all at once. Curiosity, discomfort, hunger. That particular look people get when they know they are witnessing something private that has turned public, and they are not decent enough to look away. Someone near the bar whispered, "Oh my God." Another person shifted a chair leg too fast against the floor. I heard Diane inhale sharply in a way that sounded almost theatrical. Like she needed everyone to know she was suffering through this too. My father kept speaking. He said my mother had betrayed him years ago. He said he had been pressured into silence. He said he had spent too long protecting people who did not deserve it. Every sentence was polished, prepared, stripped of tenderness. There was no grief in his voice. No confusion. This was not a man blurting out old pain. This was a man unveiling a version of events he had rehearsed until it sounded righteous. "Dad," I said, but my voice barely came out. Then louder, because I had to say something before his words hardened into the only truth the room would remember. "What are you doing?" He did not answer me as a father. He answered me like an audience problem. "I am finally being honest," he said. Honest. That word nearly broke me. Honest would have been a private conversation. Honest would have been years ago. Honest would not have arrived under string lights and hotel chandeliers in front of coworkers eating catered salmon. I looked at Ethan then because some stubborn, humiliated part of me still believed that if I met my husband's eyes, he would step in, put a stop to it, say this had gone too far. Instead he looked sick but not surprised. And once I saw that, everything inside me shifted. The betrayal I was feeling no longer belonged to one man. "You knew," I whispered. He finally looked at me then, and there it was, not denial, not confusion, but guilt. "Claire," he said softly, as if my name itself could cushion the fall. I stared at him. "You knew." He moved one step closer, lowering his voice, trying to make it seem private even though my whole life had just been dragged in front of a room full of strangers. "I found out a few weeks ago," he said. "I was trying to figure out how to tell you." That was the moment the floor seemed to tilt under me, not because I was losing my balance, but because reality had stopped behaving like reality. My father had chosen this night to erase me, and my husband had known enough to let me walk straight into it wearing heels and carrying a gift engraved with love. Around us, nobody interrupted. Nobody said, "Richard, this is wrong." Nobody said, "Claire, come sit down." The room did what rooms like that so often do when cruelty is dressed up as revelation. It listened. And my father, seeing that nobody would challenge him, lifted the microphone a little higher and prepared to say something even worse. My father lowered his voice after that, which somehow made everything worse because people leaned in instead of pulling back. "I did what I thought was right," he said into the microphone, the picture of a dignified man carrying old pain. "I gave a child my name. I paid for her schooling. I put a roof over her head. I showed up. And for years I stayed quiet because I did not want to destroy anyone's life." The cruelty of that sentence was not just in what he said. It was in the way he recast my entire existence as charity. Not love. Not fatherhood. Not family. A burden he had nobly chosen to carry until retirement freed him from the obligation of pretending. I could feel every pair of eyes in that ballroom moving over me, measuring me against the story he was building in real time. The daughter who was not a daughter. The woman who had arrived believing she belonged. The fool holding a wrapped gift with her own name engraved inside it like proof from another universe. "That is not true," I said, louder now, and my voice cracked in a way I hated because it made me sound weak when I had never needed strength more. My father turned toward me with the expression he used to wear when correcting me as a child, patient on the surface, hard underneath. "Claire, do not do this here." I almost laughed at the insanity of those words. He had already done it here. He had dragged the most intimate possible wound into a ballroom full of near strangers, and now wanted to act as though my response was the improper part. You are doing this here, I said. You chose this. You invited all these people, and then decided to humiliate me in front of them. A few heads dipped. A woman near the cake table looked down into her drink. One of my father's co-workers shifted awkwardly and took a step back, but not a single person crossed the room to stop him. That was the thing I learned that night about public humiliation. Most people do not join in directly. They just create enough silence around it for the cruelty to grow. Diane stepped forward then, one hand lightly touching my father's sleeve, the very image of a supportive wife. Claire, please, she said softly. Your father has carried this for a very long time. I stared at her. There was no concern in her face, only control. She wanted me quiet. She wanted me disoriented. She wanted me to react just enough to look unstable, and not enough to interrupt the version of events they had clearly agreed upon. How long have you known he was going to do this? I asked her. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again, and that tiny hesitation told me more than any confession could have. Megan was crying now, but even that felt complicated. She was not crying for me. She was crying because respectable family events are not supposed to crack open in public, and she had built her entire adult life on staying in the good graces of the people holding the money and the narrative. I looked at Ethan again, because some self-destructive part of me still needed to hear him deny the worst thing I was beginning to believe. Tell me you did not know he was going to say this tonight, I said. He pressed his lips together before answering, and that pause felt endless. I knew there was going to be a conversation, he said. Not no. Not never. Not I would have stopped it. Just a careful sentence crafted to protect himself from the full truth. A conversation, I repeated, staring at him in disbelief. This is your word for this? He ran a hand over his mouth, eyes darting toward the watching crowd, as if his main concern was still the scene itself and not the fact that my world had just been split open. Claire, I wanted to talk to you after. Tonight, he said. After? I said. After he stood in front of 80 people and said I am not his daughter? My voice rose then, not shrill, not wild, just wounded enough that nobody could honestly miss it. And still nobody stepped in. My father lifted the microphone again, determined to keep control. This is exactly why I did not want a confrontation, he said. You always make everything emotional. That sentence landed harder than anything else he had said. It was the oldest trick in the book. Wound a woman publicly, then criticize the sound she makes when she bleeds. Suddenly I was not just hurt. I was angry, and the anger steadied me in ways grief could not. I set the gift box down on an empty chair because my hands had started shaking and I refused to let them see that too. Then I took one slow breath and looked around the room with new eyes. The banner. The catered dinner. The photo backdrop. The guest list. The carefully timed speech. None of this had been spontaneous. This had been built, staged, managed. And somewhere inside that realization was a colder truth beginning to form. My father was not simply rejecting me. He was establishing something publicly, something he wanted witnesses for. And when I looked across the room and saw Uncle Tom near the back table avoiding my eyes, and then caught the quick look that passed between Diane and Ethan, I knew this night was about more than blood. It was about setting the table for whatever came next. My father must have sensed the room beginning to shift, because once people start suspecting there is more beneath the performance, they stop accepting the first version of the story so easily. He adjusted his grip on the microphone and did something I should have expected from him but still was not prepared for. He made my mother the villain in a room where she was not there to defend herself. I kept quiet out of respect for the dead, he said, his tone solemn now, almost holy, as if he were the injured party making a painful confession instead of a man tearing open old wounds in public. But your mother knew there were questions. She knew, and she let me live a lie. For one strange second the room blurred around the edges. My mother had been gone for 6 years. Breast cancer had taken her in slow, merciless stages, and I had sat beside her hospital bed with my father nowhere in sight most nights, listening to the oxygen machine, rubbing lotion into her hands, promising her I would be all right. He had not shown much softness then. But now, with her safely gone and unable to speak back, he was using her memory like a shield. Do not do that, I said, and my own voice sounded steadier than I felt. Do not talk about her like that. My father lifted one shoulder in that maddening, restrained way of his. I am talking about facts. Facts. Another clean word used to cover something filthy. Then say the facts, I said. Say when you found out. Say who told you. Say why you stayed silent until tonight. He did not answer any of that. Instead he looked out at the crowd and said, a man makes sacrifices for his family, and sometimes those sacrifices are not appreciated. The message was obvious. He wanted them to see him as generous and wounded, me as ungrateful and unstable. He was not only rejecting me, he was rewriting decades of history in front of witnesses. Diane stepped in with the timing of someone who had rehearsed her role. Claire, maybe we should take this somewhere private, she said, placing one hand over her chest like she was trying to calm a tragedy she had not helped create. This is hard on everyone. I turned to her so fast she took half a step back. No, I said. You do not get to make this private now. Not after letting him say all of this in public. Her face tightened for just a moment, and then the softness returned. That was Diane's real talent. Not kindness. Control. She always knew how to arrange her expression for maximum sympathy. I could see people in the room beginning to split into camps without moving an inch. Some were embarrassed for me. Some were curious. Some, especially the older company men who had known my father for years, were already leaning toward his side because men like him were practiced at sounding respectable while doing damage. My eyes found Uncle Tom again near the back. My father's younger brother had always been the one family member who still called me on my birthday without being prompted. Tonight he looked deeply uncomfortable, one hand braced on the back of a chair. His mouth set in a thin line. He still would not look directly at me. That hurt more than I wanted to admit because silence from strangers is one thing. Silence from people who know better is its own form of betrayal. Ethan finally spoke again, but only in that quiet, smoothing way he had started using whenever something threatened his comfort. Claire, let us just go home, he said. Go home. As if I could gather up the broken pieces of myself from that ballroom carpet and carry them neatly to the car. As if leaving now would erase what had been said. As if home still meant safety with him. Did you tell him to do this tonight? I asked. The question came out before I could soften it, and maybe that was good because softening anything in that room would have been a lie. Ethan's face changed, not into outrage, not into innocence, but into that same guilty caution I had already seen. No, he said. I did not tell him to do this. It should have comforted me. Instead it made my blood run colder, because it was another answer shaped around the truth rather than through it. But you knew, I said. He swallowed. I knew there were documents. Documents. Not rumors. Not feelings. Not a vague family secret. Documents. My father's eyes snapped toward him so quickly that for a moment neither of them remembered I was supposed to be the unstable one. Diane cut in at once. Ethan, this is not helping. But it helped me. It helped me because the whole night suddenly sharpened. This was not just old resentment boiling over. There were papers. Records. Something written down. Something important enough that Ethan had seen it and still brought me here dressed for a celebration. What documents? I asked. Nobody answered. My father only said, you do not need to make this uglier than it already is. I stared at him. Uglier for who? The room went so quiet then that I could hear the low hum of the hotel air conditioning and the faint clink of silverware being cleared in the kitchen beyond the double doors. My father looked older than he had an hour ago, but not sadder. Diane looked annoyed beneath her concern. Ethan looked trapped, which almost would have moved me if he had not helped build the trap. And then Megan, who had been crying quietly beside the stage, said in a shaky voice, Dad, maybe this was not the right way. It was the first crack from within their side. Small, late, but real. My father turned to her, and in that fraction of a second, I saw something I had not seen clearly before. Panic. Not grief. Not moral certainty. Panic. Because whatever he had planned for this night depended on control, and control had started slipping the moment Ethan said the word documents out loud. My father recovered quickly, the way men like him always do when they sense the room might stop admiring them. He lowered the microphone and gave the crowd a tired, wounded look, as if he were the one being cornered. This is not the time to get into paperwork, he said. Tonight was supposed to be about truth and moving forward. I stared at him, letting that sentence settle between us. Moving forward. That was what he called detonating my place in the family in front of his coworkers, neighbors, and church friends. That was what he called taking the woman who had spent her life trying to earn crumbs of his approval, and making her stand there while he informed a ballroom that she had never had any right to his name. No, I said, and this time my voice came out clear enough that even the servers near the back turned. Tonight was supposed to be your retirement party. You made it about me. So now you do not get to decide which parts are public and which parts are private. The silence after that felt different. Not empty. Charged. People were no longer just watching a family scene. They were realizing there was a structure underneath it, and that frightened my father more than my tears ever could. Diane saw it too. She moved closer to him and rested her hand lightly against his arm, but I noticed something then that I had missed before. Her fingers were tense. Not comforting him. Holding him steady. Claire, she said in that careful voice of hers, there are things you do not understand. I gave her a long look. Then explain them. She did not. Of course she did not. Because people who build traps rarely like plain questions. My eyes moved to Ethan again, and for the first time since this started, I did not see my husband as someone standing beside the disaster. I saw him as part of it. Not the architect maybe, but not innocent either. That hurt in a quieter, deeper way than anything my father had said. Because a father can fail you and still fit into old wounds. A husband is supposed to be the place you go when the world turns cruel. Ethan had not become that place. He had become another locked door. What documents? I asked again, looking only at him now. He glanced at my father, then at Diane, and that one reflex told me more than any confession could have. He was checking them before answering me. He was checking their faces before speaking to his own wife. Ethan, I said, and I hated how calm I sounded because calm meant I was past pleading. Look at me and tell me exactly what you saw. He finally met my eyes. A paternity report, he said quietly. A woman near the front table gasped under her breath. Someone else whispered, "Oh Lord." My father straightened at once, like the word itself had landed harder than he meant it to. That is enough, he said sharply. But it was not enough. It was the first honest thing anyone had said all night. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but even through the shock, one thought cut cleanly through the noise. If there was a report, then someone had ordered it. If someone had ordered it, then someone had gone looking. And if my father had really known this for years, he would not have needed a recent document to justify humiliating me tonight. When was it done? I asked. Ethan hesitated again. A few weeks ago. I turned slowly toward my father. A few weeks ago? He did not answer. His face had changed now, the righteous certainty giving way to irritation, then to something more brittle. You are twisting this, he said. Am I? I asked. Because a minute ago this was some tragic truth you have carried for years. But now suddenly there is a report from a few weeks ago. So which one is it? Did you always know? Or did you just go looking for something you could use? My voice did not rise. It sharpened. That was what made the room lean in. For the first time that night, people were not watching me unravel. They were watching his story fail to hold. Megan had stopped crying. Uncle Tom was no longer looking at the floor. Even Diane's expression slipped for a second, and in that second I saw pure annoyance, not sorrow. My father lifted the microphone again, but he no longer sounded noble. He sounded cornered. I did what I had to do, he said. For this family. For this family, I repeated. Or for your money. A visible shock moved through the room at that because now we were near the real thing. I had not planned to say it. The thought had simply arrived whole, connecting all the strange pieces at once. The staged announcement. The witnesses. The recent report. The word documents. The way Ethan had been distant for weeks. The way Diane kept trying to manage the shape of the conversation instead of denying anything. My father's pension was substantial. He had the house, the lake property his own parents left him, a retirement account everyone in the family knew existed even if nobody spoke about numbers directly. I had never thought of myself as waiting for any of it. But other people might have. Other people might have seen me as a problem to remove. Claire, Diane said quickly, too quickly. That is a disgusting accusation. I looked right at her. Then why did you need an audience? She had no answer. None of them did. And that was when I realized something that steadied me more than anger ever could. They had expected me to crumble. To cry, leave, hide, and let their version be the only version anyone remembered. They had not expected me to stay standing in my navy dress under those ballroom lights and ask the questions they were afraid to answer. Ethan took a breath like he was about to speak, and when I turned toward him, I saw real fear in his face for the first time all night. Not fear for me. Fear of what I was beginning to understand. Claire, he said softly, there is more to it than that. I believed him. And somehow that was worse. Ethan had always been careful with his words, and that night I finally understood why. Careful people can live in betrayal for a very long time because they learn how to stay 1 inch away from the ugliest sentence in the room. There is more to it than that, he repeated, and I looked at him with a kind of disbelief that no longer felt hot or dramatic. It felt cold, final, like hearing a door lock from the other side. Then say it, I told him. Say all of it. Right here. The same way they decided to do this to me. He glanced around the ballroom, and I could almost see him measuring outcomes, calculating what could still be controlled. My father stood stiffly near the podium, his retirement banner hanging behind him like a joke that had gone rotten. Diane's face was tense now, the sympathy mask slipping every few seconds. Megan had stepped farther back, one hand pressed to her mouth. Uncle Tom still had not moved, but he was watching Ethan now, not my father. That detail mattered. Somewhere in the room, the real center of the story had begun to shift. A few weeks ago, Ethan said finally, his voice low but carrying in the silence, Richard asked me to meet him for coffee. My father turned to him at once. That is enough, he snapped. But Ethan kept going, maybe because he knew the room would never let him retreat cleanly now. Maybe because fear had finally loosened something guilt could not. He said there were family matters I needed to know as your husband. He said there were questions about your mother, questions he had ignored for years, and that he had decided to get clarity before finalizing some legal things after retirement. Legal things. Not grief. Not truth. Legal things. The words landed exactly where I knew they would. In money. In paperwork. In status. I felt a strange stillness come over me then. The kind that arrives when pain is finally given structure. My father had not chosen tonight because he could not carry the burden anymore. He had chosen tonight because retirement meant signatures, beneficiaries, distributions, ownership, and witnesses. Did you go with him? I asked Ethan. He nodded once. To the attorney's office, yes. There it was. No one even pretended to interrupt politely after that. The room had gone beyond discomfort into something sharper. People were not just embarrassed anymore. They were listening for motive. And you did not think to tell me? I asked. Ethan looked miserable, but misery is not innocence. I wanted to, he said. I kept trying to find the right time. I almost smiled at that. Except there was nothing funny in it. The right time, I repeated. You mean a time after I had already walked into a ballroom and been stripped of my place in my own family? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer that would not expose him further. My father stepped down from the small platform then, no longer interested in the microphone now that it had stopped serving him. You are making assumptions, he said to me, but his voice had lost that polished confidence from earlier. No, I said. I am following the trail you left in public by mistake. Diane moved in quickly, as if speed alone could repair the unraveling. Claire, your father was trying to handle this responsibly. I turned to her. Responsibly would have been a private conversation with me, not a performance in front of coworkers and neighbors. Responsibly would have been honesty before lawyers, before reports, before my own husband was brought into it behind my back. That hit her. Not enough to make her truthful, but enough to make her angry. You are not the only person affected by this, she said. And there it was, the first honest emotion she had shown all night. Not sorrow. Not compassion. Irritation that I was not staying in the role they assigned me. Then tell me who else is affected, I said. Tell me exactly what changes if I am suddenly no longer Richard Bennett's daughter. She looked at my father, and that one glance answered everything. Property, benefits, inheritance, control. I did not need numbers yet. I only needed the direction of truth. My father took one more step toward me and lowered his voice, trying once again to force the scene back into something he could manage. I gave you a good life, he said. Better than a lot of people get. Do not stand here and act as if you have been wrong just because the facts are inconvenient. That sentence changed something in me permanently. It was not only cruel. It was revealing. He truly believed that anything he had ever provided canceled out whatever he did now. That if he had paid for school clothes and dentist visits and a used Honda when I turned 16, then he had purchased the right to publicly recast me as a mistake. You do not get to call this inconvenient, I said. You waited until there were legal consequences. That is why Ethan was involved. That is why there is a report from a few weeks ago instead of 20 years ago. That is why you needed a room full of witnesses. You are not telling the truth. You are setting the record for something you plan to do next. Nobody in that ballroom spoke after I said that. Nobody denied it either. Even the hotel staff seemed frozen at the edges of the room, as if they understood they were watching something more serious than a family argument. I turned to Ethan one last time because there was one answer I still needed before I could stop seeing him as confused and start seeing him clearly. Did you agree with him? I asked. His eyes filled with a kind of panic I had once mistaken for tenderness. I thought, he said slowly, I thought it would be easier if everything was clarified before the estate documents were changed. Estate documents. He said it out loud. He said the quiet part in a room full of witnesses. And the moment he did, I realized my husband had not just kept a secret from me. He had already started planning his life on the other side of my erasure. After Ethan said the words estate documents, the room changed in a way I do not think any of them had planned for. Up until then, people could still pretend they were witnessing some tragic family revelation. Something messy but personal. A private wound spilling out in an unfortunate place. But money changes the moral shape of a story very quickly. Once people understand there are lawyers and signatures and property behind the tears, they stop seeing pain as pain and start recognizing strategy. My father knew it too. I saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, in the way he looked briefly toward the back of the ballroom where two men from his church stood whispering near the coffee station. Diane knew it. Her whole face sharpened. Even Megan, who had spent most of the evening trying not to challenge the version of events unfolding in front of her, looked at Ethan like she no longer recognized him. As for me, I felt something inside me go very still. It was not peace. It was the death of confusion. For the first time that night, I was not drowning in what had happened. I was seeing why it had happened. My father had not chosen this moment because retirement had made him brave. He had chosen it because retirement had made everything official. Beneficiaries, titles, distributions, final decisions. And Ethan, my husband, had not merely stood by while I was humiliated. He had participated in the timing of my removal. So that is what I am to you now, I said, looking at him with a calm that surprised even me. A complication to be clarified before paperwork is signed. That is not what I meant, he said immediately, but his voice had lost all authority. He was no longer speaking as my partner. He was speaking as a man trying to manage the moment after telling on himself. Then explain what you meant, I said. Slowly. In front of everyone. He looked trapped. Good. Let him feel one thin layer of the exposure they had prepared for me. Richard said if the report confirmed what he suspected, then there would need to be updates, he said. He thought it was better to settle things cleanly instead of letting this turn into a legal mess later. Cleanly. That word nearly made me laugh. There was nothing clean about any of this. Not the setup. Not the speech. Not the way my own husband had allowed me to buy a gift for the man who was planning to publicly disown me. I thought about that engraved watch still sitting on the chair near the stage, wrapped in silver paper now creased from my grip. Proud of you, Dad. Love, Claire. I wondered if Ethan had seen it in the car and felt even one flicker of shame. And where exactly do you fit into that? I asked him. Why were you at those meetings? Ethan swallowed hard. Because I am your husband. No, I said. A husband tells his wife when her father is trying to erase her. A husband does not sit with lawyers and then help drive her to the event where it happens. He flinched, not dramatically, just enough to show that the truth had found its target. My father tried to take control again. "You are twisting everyone's intentions," he said. "Ethan was trying to protect you from a drawn-out fight." I turned to him and held his gaze until he had to actually feel me looking back. Protect me from what? My own life? My own name? My own right to know what was being said about me in rooms I was kept out of. He said nothing. That silence was answer enough. It was Uncle Tom who moved first. I will never forget it, because until that moment I had started to believe every person in that ballroom would choose comfort over conscience. He pushed back his chair, walked toward us with slow, reluctant steps, and stopped a few feet from my father. "Richard," he said quietly, "did you really do this through an attorney before speaking to Claire?" My father's face hardened at once. "This is none of your business." Uncle Tom gave a sad little nod, as if that was the answer he had expected and dreaded. "That is not a no," he said. The room held its breath. My father hated being questioned by family, especially by someone who knew him from before he learned how to turn every moral failure into a polished speech. Diane stepped in again, but the softness was gone now. "Tom, please do not add to this," she said. He looked at her, then at me, and for the first time all night someone in my family looked openly ashamed on my behalf. "I am not adding to it," he said. "I am trying to understand why Claire is hearing about all this in a ballroom instead of a living room." Nobody answered him. Because they could not. Because the only truthful answer was ugly. I suddenly remembered 3 small things from the past month that had felt strange at the time, and now snapped into place so hard they almost made me dizzy. Ethan asking if I still had copies of my birth certificate and my mother's old papers. Diane calling one Sunday afternoon to ask whether I still intended to keep my mother's last boxes in my guest room for much longer. My father leaving me a voicemail that sounded almost warm, saying we should all come together soon because he wanted retirement to be a fresh start. It had all been positioning, checking what I knew, measuring what I had, keeping me calm until they were ready. "How long?" I asked, and this time I was speaking to all 3 of them. "How long have you been planning this?" My father looked away first. Diane folded her arms. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a tell I had once mistaken for stress and now recognized as guilt. "A month," he said. The word dropped into the room like a stone. A month. 30 days of shared meals, ordinary conversations, folded laundry, grocery lists, and quiet betrayal sitting across from me at the breakfast table. A month of Ethan kissing my forehead before work, while carrying information that could have changed everything if he had chosen honesty over convenience. A month of my father inviting me to his retirement party, while preparing to strip my place from the family under hotel chandeliers. I felt suddenly, vividly, that the marriage I had walked into that ballroom with was already over, even if no one had spoken those exact words yet. And then Megan, in a voice so small I almost missed it, said the one thing none of them wanted heard. "Dad told Ethan it would be better for everyone if Claire did not fight it." For a second after Megan spoke, nobody moved. It was as if the entire room had reached the edge of something ugly and finally seen how deep it went. My father turned toward her with a look I had seen only a few times in my life, the look he gave when someone threatened the version of events he had already decided was acceptable. "Megan," he said low and sharp, "you do not know what you are talking about." But she did. I could hear it in the trembling way she took a breath before answering. "I know what I heard," she said. "You said Claire would make it emotional, and you told Ethan it would be easier if everything was already decided before she found out." The words did not echo in the ballroom, but they landed everywhere at once. There was no way to dress them up. No noble interpretation. No wounded father carrying truth at last. Just planning. Timing. Strategy. I looked at Ethan and saw him break in small ways all over his face. Not because he had suddenly become sorry enough, but because the parts of the plan that depended on my confusion were falling apart. "Is that true?" I asked him. He shut his eyes for a brief second, and I knew before he answered that whatever remained of my marriage had been living on borrowed time. "He said you would take it badly," Ethan murmured. "He said if it was handled after the estate papers were updated, there would be less chaos." Less chaos. I repeated those words silently in my head, and with them came a rush of memories from the last month that now looked completely different. Ethan standing in the kitchen one Tuesday night, asking in an overly casual tone whether my mother had ever left me anything in writing. Ethan checking the mail more often than usual, and setting one envelope aside when he thought I was not paying attention. Ethan telling me my father seemed softer lately, that maybe retirement was making him sentimental, that maybe I should try a little harder because families regret distance when it is too late. At the time I had taken those moments as awkward kindness. Now they arranged themselves into a pattern so obvious I felt foolish for ever missing it. He was not guiding me toward reconciliation. He was steering me calmly toward the exact place where I would be weakest. You helped him keep me calm, I said, and my voice sounded almost detached, as if I were describing someone else's life. Ethan shook his head too quickly. That is not fair. No, I said. What is not fair is sitting at dinner with your wife, asking about her dead mother's paperwork, and never once warning her that her father is trying to erase her before changing legal documents. That word erase hung between us longer than anything else had all night, maybe because it was the plainest word for what they were doing. Not clarifying. Not resolving. Erasing. My father stepped closer, and every instinct in me recoiled, not from fear but from disgust. You are acting like this is some conspiracy, he said. It is not a conspiracy to correct a lie. I looked right at him. Then why hide it from me for a month? He had no clean answer. None of them did. Diane tried again, her voice carrying that polished patience she used when she wanted to sound like the only adult in the room. Claire, your father was trying to avoid a drawn-out legal conflict. You may not understand how complicated these matters can become. I understand perfectly, I said. You needed me uninformed until the right paperwork was ready. She opened her mouth, but I kept going because for the first time all night I felt stronger speaking than staying quiet. And you did not just want me uninformed. You wanted me discredited. That is why he announced this here. In public. If I protest later I look emotional. If I fight later I look greedy. If I question the timing later, you all get to say everyone already knows the truth. A murmur moved through the crowd then. Small but undeniable. People were putting it together. The coworkers. The church friends. The neighbors. They could see now that the setting was not accidental. The room itself had been used as a weapon. Uncle Tom rubbed a hand over his face and let out a long breath. Richard, he said, if this was really about truth you would have done it in private. My father's jaw tightened. You are all forgetting who was lied to first. There it was again, the old instinct to center himself no matter who else got crushed beneath it. My mother had become his excuse. I had become his inconvenience. Ethan had become his helper. Diane had become his manager. And in the middle of all of it stood me, the only person whose life was being discussed as if I were absent. I suddenly remembered a voicemail from Grandma Eleanor 3 weeks earlier that I had almost returned but never did because Ethan told me she was probably just lonely and rambling again. My grandmother never called without reason. She was my father's mother, 81 years old, still sharp beneath the softness of age, and one of the few people in this family who never hid behind pretty phrasing. I had missed her call because Ethan had talked me out of it. That memory hit me so hard I almost swayed. What if she had known? What if she had tried to warn me? I looked at Ethan with new clarity. There were more secrets than the ones already spoken. There had to be. Did you keep anything else from me? I asked. He hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw everything I needed to know. Not the details yet, but the shape. More conversations. More papers. More moments where he had chosen them over me. Claire, he said, and even hearing my name in his mouth felt wrong now. I was trying to protect our future. Our future. The cruelty of that nearly took my breath away. By helping my father decide whether I still belonged to my own family? He looked down. That was answer enough. My father began saying something then about respect, about not turning this into a spectacle, and that almost broke something loose in me because it was such a shameless thing to say after what he had done. But before I could answer, I saw one of the hotel servers quietly pick up the silver-wrapped box I had left near the stage and place it on the side table beside the cake. My gift. Still unopened. Still carrying the words "proud of you, Dad. Love, Claire." And in that image was the final humiliation of the night. They had planned my removal while I was still arriving with love in my hands. I looked from the box to my father, then to Ethan, and in that instant I understood that the next thing I needed was not another argument in a ballroom. It was the truth from someone they had not been able to fully control. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to the missed call from Grandma Eleanor. I did not ask permission. I did not announce what I was doing. I just pressed call and held the phone to my ear right there in the ballroom, while my father was still trying to recover control of the room. For one terrifying second I thought it would go to voicemail, that I would hear her recorded greeting and be left standing in front of 80 people with nothing but my own shaking breath. Then she answered. Claire. My grandmother's voice came through thin but clear, the sound of an ordinary truth entering an extraordinary lie. Honey, I have been trying to reach you. Every eye in that room seemed to sharpen. My father's expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Not concern. Alarm. Real alarm. Grandma, I said. And I hated how young I sounded in that moment, like the child in me had rushed forward because the woman in me was too wounded to stand alone. Did you know about this? There was a pause on the line, and in that pause I heard the television low in the background, the clink of a teacup, the normal sounds of a life untouched by hotel chandeliers and public betrayal. I knew your father was planning something ugly, she said. I did not know he would be shameless enough to do it in front of a room full of people. A visible ripple moved through the crowd. My father stepped toward me. Claire, hang up the phone. I turned away from him. That was the first clean choice I had made all night. No, I said. My grandmother heard him anyway. Richard is there, is he? She asked, and there was no warmth in her tone when she said his name. Yes, I said. He says he is finally telling the truth. She let out one bitter breath of disbelief. Your father has never minded truth when it served him late. I closed my eyes for half a second because that sentence felt like a hand reaching into the chaos and finding the exact center of it. Then tell me, I said. Please. Tell me what I do not know. My father took another step toward me. Uncle Tom moved in front of him, not dramatically, just enough to slow him down. Diane hissed something under her breath that I could not make out. Ethan stayed where he was, and that somehow felt even worse than if he had tried to stop me. He already knew the cost of this truth. He was just waiting to see how much of it would survive the open air. Grandma Eleanor spoke slowly, the way older people do when they know younger ones have built their lives on a lie, and need the words to land cleanly. Years ago, she said, before your mother married your father, there were rumors. Only rumors. Your father found an old letter after you were born and decided he had questions. He was angry, proud, and more concerned with his image than his heart even back then. He came to me in a rage. He said he wanted to force an answer. I could barely breathe. Around me the ballroom was silent enough to hear the soft crackle of the phone speaker. What happened? I whispered. Your mother offered to test, Grandma said. Your father backed down. I stared straight ahead at the retirement banner behind the stage, at the absurd blue lettering that now looked like set decoration from someone else's nightmare. Why would he back down? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. Because a lawyer told him that once he claimed you, raised you, and put his name on everything, he would not be able to undo fatherhood cleanly later. He was told that if he wanted out, he needed to do it then. And he did not. He chose to stay. My father's face drained of color so quickly that even strangers could see it. Mother, he said, his voice tight with warning. That is not how it happened. She ignored him completely. He chose to stay, Claire, she repeated. Not because he was a saint. Not because he was trapped. Because leaving would have made him look cruel. And because once your mother became ill years later, he knew no one would dare question his image if he kept playing the loyal father. The room felt as though it tilted again, but this time not beneath me. Beneath him. My father had built the entire evening on the idea that he had been tricked into a false role, forced to carry a burden not his own. But if what Grandma was saying was true, then he had known there were doubts when I was an infant and made a deliberate choice to remain my legal father anyway. Which meant tonight was not an act of truth at all. It was an act of convenience. A revision time to money. Did he ever know for certain? I asked. No, she said. Not then. Not ever, until whatever foolishness he did recently. But certainty is not the point. He had his chance to walk away before you knew the meaning of the word father. He did not take it. He stayed, and in staying he accepted the role. He does not get to unmake 30 years because retirement paperwork makes him feel bold. Someone in the crowd whispered, "My God." My father looked as though he wanted to tear the phone out of my hand, but Uncle Tom still stood between us, and now he was not the only one. One of my father's old co-workers had stepped a little closer too, not touching anyone, just making it clear that whatever happened next would have witnesses in a different sense now. Diane tried one last time. "Eleanor is confused," she said quickly. "She is elderly and upset." My grandmother heard that. "Diane," she said sharply through the speaker, "I am old, not confused, and you should be ashamed of yourself." A few people actually looked away then, not from me but from Diane. It was the first shame in the room that seemed properly placed. "Grandma," I said, and my voice broke a little on the word. "Did you try to warn me?" "Yes," she said. "I called twice. The first time your husband answered and said you were resting. The second time he told me it would only upset you before your father's party, and that he would help handle things." I turned to Ethan slowly. He did not deny it. He just stood there with the face of a man who had run out of places to hide. And in that moment, with my grandmother's truth still hanging in the air and my husband's silence confirming more than any confession could, I understood that what they had done was even colder than I first imagined. They had not only planned to erase me, they had tried to control who could save me before I ever walked into the room. After my grandmother said that Ethan had intercepted her calls, the last soft illusion I had about my marriage disappeared. Until then, some part of me had still been trying to sort his betrayal into categories that hurt less. Cowardice, weakness, bad judgment. But stopping a warning from reaching me was not weakness. It was participation. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw how ordinary he seemed in that moment. Gray jacket, blue tie, familiar face. The man who knew how I took my coffee and which side of the bed I slept on. The man who had watched me grieve my mother, who had heard every insecure thing I ever said about my father, who knew exactly how badly I wanted to believe there was still a place for me in that family. He had used all of that knowledge not to protect me, but to make me easier to manage. "You told her not to warn me," I said. My voice was so steady it frightened even me. Ethan did not deny it. He rubbed his jaw, glanced once toward the floor and said, "I thought if we could get through tonight without a scene, then we could deal with everything more calmly afterward." Calmly. They kept reaching for that word as if calm were the highest form of love. As if silence, delay, and controlled humiliation were somehow kinder than honesty. "You mean after my father had publicly established his version?" I said. "After the witnesses. After the embarrassment. After I had already been made to look unstable if I objected." He looked up at me then, and for the first time all night I saw that he understood. I could see the full shape of it now. Not just the betrayal but the method. My father had needed a room full of people to make his story feel official. Diane had needed me emotional enough to be dismissed. Ethan had needed me uninformed long enough for paperwork to move without resistance. It was not chaos they were afraid of. It was me asking questions before they were ready. "Claire," Ethan said softly, "please believe that I never wanted to hurt you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because it was so painfully incomplete. Men always seem to think harm only counts if they enjoyed causing it. "Intent does not rescue you from what you did," I said. "You helped them isolate me. You let me walk in blind." My father finally snapped then, not loudly, but with the brittle anger of a man whose careful image had split at the seams. "That is enough," he said. "This has gone far beyond what was necessary." I turned to him with more clarity than I had ever felt in his presence. "Necessary for whom?" I asked. "For the daughter you wanted to humiliate? Or for the estate plan you wanted to protect?" He took a step toward me, stopped, and then did something revealing. He did not answer the accusation. He answered the money. "I have a right to decide where my assets go," he said. There it was. Not a family wound. Not a search for truth. A right to decide where assets go. I watched the reaction move through the room like a weather change. People understood plain language. Assets. Decide. Go. The euphemisms had finally burned off. Uncle Tom folded his arms and shook his head once, very slightly, with the tired disappointment of a brother seeing the worst version of another brother made public at last. Richard, he said, you could have changed a will without doing this. My father did not even look at him. Not without questions later. That sentence silenced the room in a new way, because now it was all but admitted. He had not merely wanted to change documents. He had wanted to create a story strong enough to defend the changes when they were noticed. And for that story to hold, I had to be publicly diminished first. So that is what tonight was, I said. Not closure. Evidence. Diane stepped forward again, but she no longer bothered pretending to be maternal. You are making this uglier than it needed to be, she said. I looked at her and realized with a strange calm that she had never truly mattered on her own. She mattered as an enabler, as the person who kept the table set while someone else carried the knife. No, I said. You made it ugly when you all decided I should hear about my own life from a microphone instead of a chair in a quiet room. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. Good. Let her sit in it for once. I glanced down at my phone and saw that my grandmother was still on the line listening. Claire, she said gently, do not let them rush you now. That sentence settled over me like a hand on my back. Do not let them rush you now. All night they had been trying to control my timing. Shock me before I could think. Corner me before I could respond. Push me toward leaving before I could understand. But the truth had changed the rhythm of the room. I no longer felt like the one falling behind. I felt like the only person standing still. I walked to the side table, picked up the silver-wrapped watch, and held it in both hands for a second. The paper was creased. The ribbon had shifted. It looked like something rescued from a wreck. I turned back to my father. I bought this because I still believed there was something decent left. In you, I said. That was my mistake, not my shame. I set the box down on the cake table instead of giving it to him. It was a small act, but in that ballroom it felt final. My father opened his mouth, maybe to reclaim authority, maybe to scold me for the disrespect of not handing over a gift meant to honor him. But before he could speak, Ethan said my name again, more urgently this time. Claire, please. Let us go home and talk. Home. The word sounded empty now, almost offensive. Home was where he had sat with his secrets. Home was where he had watched me trust him. Home was where I would have kept unraveling in private, while they enjoyed the safety of their public narrative. No, I said. I am not going anywhere with you tonight. His face changed then, not dramatically, just enough to show that some part of him had assumed I still would. That even after all this, I might still choose the marriage because it was familiar and the ballroom was cruel and people cling to the nearest structure when their lives crack open. But I was past that. You chose your side a month ago, I said. You just waited until tonight for me to find out. And because truth had a way of attracting more truth once someone finally stopped lying, Megan spoke again from near the stage, her voice trembling but clear. Dad already signed the first set of revisions on Thursday. 3 months after that night, my life is quieter than I ever thought silence could be. I moved into a small apartment on the north side of Columbus with second-hand lamps, one good coffee maker, and windows that finally let me breathe. The divorce is moving forward. I do not speak to my father. I still speak to Grandma Eleanor every Sunday. Some mornings the grief comes back sharp, but it no longer confuses me. It reminds me that love without respect will break you slowly, and that peace often begins the moment you stop begging to be chosen by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. What I learned is simple, even if it costs me everything to learn it. Blood does not give someone the right to define your worth. Marriage does not excuse betrayal. And family is not the people who can humiliate you most convincingly in public. Family is where truth is safe. If you are listening to me tonight while carrying your own private heartbreak, I hope you hear this like a hand reaching back for yours. You are not hard to love because someone failed to love you well. You are not less valuable because someone rewrote your place in their story. Thank you for staying with me through this. Thank you for listening long enough for the truth to have a witness. If this story touched something tender in you, I would love to know what boundary changed your life. And only if this story truly resonated with you, you can like and subscribe. There is another story in the description that may sit with you too. Wherever you are tonight, take gentle care of your heart. Goodbye for now with hope. Claire Bennett, 30. And the core lesson of this story is that self-respect must be stronger than the need to belong.